Welcome to the 10th History Bites of 2021. My name is Dawn Owen, and I'm the curator at Guelph Museums. Today, I am in conversation with Métis artist Tracey-Mae Chambers about her project called #Hope and Healing Canada. History Bites is a 1 hour long casual conversation during which we chat about the latest news, exhibitions, and other happenings at Guelph Museums. Join us on Facebook Live on the third Wednesday of every month at noon. A recording of today's History Bites will be available through the Museum Everywhere portal on our website and of course on our social platforms after the live broadcast. Before I introduce and welcome our guest, I'd like to focus our thoughts within an awareness and acknowledgement of the land. Guelph is located on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe peoples, specifically the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The place we now call Guelph is on land that is described in the Between the Lakes Purchase No. 3 Treaty, 1792, an agreement between the Mississaugas of the Credit and the British Crown, concerning over 3 million acres of land between Lakes Ontario, Huron, and Erie. Today, Guelph is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Guelph Museums commits to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and to doing more to learn, share, and support truth and healing. When we started the History Bites series, we spent time in close conversation with the land, its history, and its peoples. We continue to grow our knowledge and our relationships with our treaty partner, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and with the many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who call Guelph home. This informs all that we do at the museum and underscores our commitment to each other today and for the health and well-being of future generations. Today's conversation with Tracey-Mae Chambers centers on her project called Hope and Healing Canada, through which she responds to our collective experiences of the pandemic and decolonization. In this work, Tracey-Mae mourns with Indigenous communities and Canadians as unmarked graves are discovered at the sites of former residential schools across the country. Decolonizing themes of hope and healing drive her work as she symbolically reconnects a fractured society with tangled webs of red yarn. Hope and Healing Canada asks how we can heal and support one another through traumatic and life-altering events. It is my pleasure to welcome you, Tracey-Mae, to History Bites. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So since July 2nd, you've been traveling to communities across Ontario, creating site-specific installations in red yarn. Your project, Hope and Healing Canada, has moved at, I would say, an intensive pace. I think you said to me with over 70 installations completed and forthcoming, including a simultaneous indoor and outdoor installation at the Guelph Civic Museum. My first question for you is meant truly earnestly, and I encourage you to answer it in the way that you will, but how are you doing?
Good. I'm honored at the number of venues that have reached out and are continuing to reach out. So we're actually at 73 now. So 74 as of yesterday. So because the University of Waterloo. God, I don't remember. Somebody anyway emailed yesterday wants it. So it's like it just builds. So that is really great. And I'm tired, but other than that, it's fine, right? Like, because it's important right now, and it's important to keep it in the Canadian conscience right now. So the more I can do that, the better I'll feel. Yeah, it shouldn't be just one day, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. I know that you are working at a pace. I saw the pace. I witnessed the pace that you worked at when you were here at the Guelph Civic Museum, and truly, it is the honor of the venues that you work with and the people who sort of keep the lights on in those spaces and who have the conversations day to day with visitors. through your work. In our case, of course, the installation is in the entrance, the main entrance of the museum, and it is both sort of a space of contemplation and a throughway, if you will, people moving in and out of the museum and through the floors, the 3 floors that that your installation scales. So it's been a real pleasure and an honor to not only witness your process, but also to be the ones hosting and facilitating those kinds of interactions. So I'd really like to start our conversation today sort of more generally, so we can all learn from you more about your practice as an artist. So can you tell me a little bit about how you became an artist?
Oddly enough, so I mean, every woman out there will understand this. Your life sort of gets taken over by having children and things like that. So the first commission I ever did was when I was 11, and I did an oil painting for an uncle of mine. And when he passed away, I don't know how many years ago, a few years ago, his son sent it back to me. So it was so strange to have this, which I threw out because it was so horrible. But I just couldn't even look at it. So, but he paid me $100 to make this painting. So, but then, I mean, life gets in the way and you have to, you know, make money to eat and all those kinds of things. And I had children. So I didn't really start until about 2011, really. Yeah, so it's been a short period of time, relatively speaking. And I started with acrylic painting, and then I saw someone do some encaustic painting online or something. So my husband and I traveled to Toronto. I went to every encaustic artist I could find, and then approached Anne Shire, who was my favorite, and asked her to mentor me, and paid her to work with her for 6 weeks for a residency, which was wonderful. She's a remarkable painter. And then from there, actually, so for the last, I guess, 6 or 7 years, I've been doing encaustic sculpture predominantly. And that came out of a mistake. I was in my studio and it didn't have heat in it. It had heaters, but it didn't have heat. And it was really super cold 6 or 7 years ago in the winter. And I could, for me to be cold, it's got to be pretty damn cold. So just as I was going to go inside, so I moved a container, like a hot plate of wax, about 2 pounds of wax, and I dropped it, and it spilled on my studio floor. And you could have heard me swearing from 10 blocks away. I was so upset because it's expensive, right? There goes $35, $40. So I went in the house. When I came back the next day, it was frozen. And it actually lifted up from the floor and separated. And it was just this whole aha moment. Oh my God, why am I doing 2D? I don't even like 2D. That's not I would rather sculpt in 3D form. So, and then I've never painted since. It took me 6 weeks to figure out how to actually sculpt with it. And that's my main practice now. However, I'm a bit of an outdoor cat that's been declawed. So I'd rather be outside, but still sleep inside kind of thing. So anytime I can do installation work, I'm going to choose to do installation work where I have the option of working outside. So I started doing the work with the string and other fabrics maybe about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and totally enjoyed that, and enjoyed being able to work with a natural material, just like the beeswax and encaustic. I want to use natural materials. I mean, we make such an impact on the environment inadvertently, even if we're, you know, just everything we do, right? If I can make a choice to not use something that is a detriment to the environment, I'm going to do that. So hence the reason the yarn is a great choice as well, because I'm literally not hurting anything. So it's a conscience thing as well, right? So yeah, so that's essentially, I tend to want to be political about things, and not necessarily just about First Nations or Indigenous, Inuit, or Métis struggles, but certainly poverty is always on my mind, and injustices against females and against anyone who's marginalized is a big part of my practice.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Not my baby, but I tried.
Yeah, I mean, I was really interested because having looked at your website and I've sort of acquainted myself with some of your earlier works before this major body of work that has been driving so much of what you've done over the last number of months. It is interesting because it's you know, to move from an encaustic sculpture into site-specific installation entirely in yarn.
Yeah,
For some, I'll include myself, you know, they feel like very different processes. But in hearing your description, I can see sort of how it's much more organic as a process than some of us might assume just by looking at sort of the individual pieces.
absolutely.
And I
But
can
isn't it
almost
really?
vision you in your studio.
Yeah, but isn't the site-specific installation just a really big sculpture?
It is.
It is. So to me,
Yeah.
when I'm making those geometric shapes, I mean, I can see them not as string, but as geometric shapes. And I always sort of hope I have more time or wish I had more time. And I don't take breaks or any of that kind of crap, but I I'd like to be able to have the time and space to make them so they're actual three-dimensional shapes created with string.
Yeah.
There's just not enough time, right?
You know,
So
it's
yeah.
interesting. A few years ago, I was working with an artist who had done an enormous amount of site-specific sculpture, always temporary though. So
Mhm.
sort of similarly inspired to the work that you're doing now. Of course, you know, driving at well, she was very interested in the displacement of people and
Oh, okay. Yeah.
animals in urban spaces, and so was through temporary installations trying to shift those understandings, draw attention to those spaces. And the project that we did together, I should say who I'm talking about is a Guelph artist, Janet Morton, who's a phenomenal textile artist, as well as someone who does a whole lot of other things in her practice. And we were working collaboratively on an exhibition, and there was an opportunity to do an outdoor sculpture. And I said, how do you feel about doing a permanent sculpture? And that was the first time that I'm sure it took some time to sort of process and think through what she might do, but the shift in that moment from sort of something that would be temporary, you know, for the most part non-invasive, into something that was going to be there, if not forever, because forever is
Mhm.
a very long time, but that would have a semi-permanent basis in materials that are for the most part sort of unmoving,
Mhm.
at least to the human eye, to the human experience. You know, was a major shift, but it also came at a time when the confrontation of those elements was really interesting, and the tension that lives in the work is there because, you know, it says, you know, here we've said this in this place at this time, this is what we're doing, and it's not going to change. We're going to revisit it day over day over
Right.
day.
Oh, that's,
And
yeah.
so, you know, with the piece you've done at the Guelph Civic Museum, you know, we're very fortunate in that you are allowing us to hold the piece, you know, right until the end of February, the piece inside the museum's main entrance. And it'll be interesting to understand how that piece evolves over time, how people engage it and re-engage it as they come back to the museum and sort of shift in their day-to-day life. You know,
Mhm.
it's even though it's protected for the most part from the external environment, you know, we can see through to whatever is happening in the world around us. So if it's, you know, dead winter and we're in the middle of a blizzard, if it's
Yeah.
bright sunlight, you know,
Yeah.
it's going to
Yeah.
fundamentally shift and change sort of how the
Mhm.
piece behaves. So
Yeah, I think that's remarkable. I like that part of it. Yeah.
absolutely. So, could you tell or share with us so you're working in your studio, you're experimenting with all of these different materials from encaustic to textiles. Um, where does the idea for Hope and Healing Canada sort of find its start?
Uh,
Have you thought about where it sort of emerged?
yeah. I think it was when you watch the news and it's like a gut punch every time, pretty much, right? So, which is, I think, why a lot of people try to stay away from it. But I think I'm not sure at what point it was after Kamloops, anyways. The first discovery of the 215 children. Discovery is such an interesting word, but so I think at that point I had been thinking about how to connect with people after COVID, like how can I connect to my sons? How do I connect to my family and my friends and my customers? And, you know, it just keeps going out. The people I have obligations to, how do I connect with those people? And how do I illustrate my need or want to reconnect? Because I mean, there's a want to connect, and then there's a need to connect. And I think I've been playing with that lately too. That has changed. And of course it evolves, this project evolves as I move along, right? As far as what I'm thinking about. But yeah, so at the beginning was simply, how do I reconnect, and how can I illustrate connection in a tangible sense? And so I thought, well, thread. That was what I could think about. That was like I can hold one end, you can hold the other end, and we're connected. And it doesn't, you know, it's only the parameters is literally how long is the string. So it's just like, right. So I thought I started with that, but then as I became more upset about what was happening as a result of residential schools and the conversations that were happening subsequent to that. Now, whether that's a positive or negative conversation, both of those affected how I was feeling, because certainly if you read the comment section on any Facebook post by CBC or any of the other news organizations about residential schools, there's some really crazy shit there that you can't, that it's hard to wade through that and not wear some of it as you're walking through, right? You can't step in shit and not have some on your shoes. So that's what it felt like as I was walking through trying to read those. Now, and I don't read them at all anymore because you just can't, right? Even though there's positive ones in there, and I recognize that, I don't care. I just can't. The negative ones seem to outweigh the positive ones at this point. I can't explain why that is, but anyways, so I chose the color red, and the string was already going to be how I was going to express it. Then I had to think about the color of the yarn, because what am I trying to express? So I was isolation, depression, anger. I'm passionate about the issue. Like all of these things are represented by the color red. The racial slur is the color red, right? So that was the best way for me to do it. And then the first one that I did was at Stratford Art Gallery, aside from the ones that I created in my own space. The first one was at Stratford Art Gallery. And it was funny because I did it and I hate it. I'm actually redoing it next weekend, because at the beginning I went there and I didn't know what I was going to do. Like not that I couldn't focus, but I wasn't maybe mentally ready, because everything afterwards was far more complicated. So I felt like I emailed Angela and said, okay, I don't know if you're open to this, and you don't have to pay me or anything, but I need to come back because I can't sit with this. And I know people think I'm crazy anyways, but I had to redo it because it wasn't up to the standard that I wanted. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a perfectionist, but what's the point in doing it if it's not going to be impactful? Like, what's the point, right? Why bother? I might as well be painting kittens and butterflies. Like, why do something if it's not, what you actually are trying to say is not exposed in that work? Yeah. So that's how it really came about, was that how do I connect string? Now what do I do with the string? And I'm still progressing through that. Each one I want different. So how do I sew something that is complicated enough to express an idea and beautiful, right? So that it's engaging, because that's part of it too, right? It can't just be a mess of string somewhere. It has to be something that people walk up and say, what is that? And why are you doing that, right? Or, I mean, I get a lot of, are you supposed to be doing that? Do you have a permit? I get that a lot too. So yeah, so I hope that answers the question, that's really, you know, where I was heading, or how I was heading there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've planted so many images in my mind, and one of them is, of course, as I mentioned earlier, witnessing your creative process as you were here on our site, sort of moving, throwing your balls of yarn and everything else, and with so much, at least from where I sat, so much precision. I was just marveling at your process.
Desperation, that's what that was.
I say precision, you say desperation, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But also because you had completed a large section
Mm-hmm.
on, I think, maybe day 2 of your installation, and then on day 3 you said, it's not going to fly. I
Yeah.
need to take this down. I need to redo it.
I know.
And I saw that struggle and that tension in that. But you know what? And we were like, but it's so beautiful and it's so powerful. But it wasn't where it needed to be for you.
Yeah. I have a problem. Right? I can't. Yeah. If it's not working, then I mean, I'd rather just start over, right?
Yeah.
And work twice as hard. So yeah.
And I think, what else is interesting to me, as you were talking about sort of the yarn or the string as being, maybe I'll use the term humble, like it's a humble material.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
also, we all sort of really understand it, even if we're not an artist or someone who sews or knits or crochets, or, even if we don't have an intimate relationship with that material, we understand what it is. And it's so sort of tactile, right?
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
I will confess that as I move through the installation day over day, because that's, the great privilege that we have in the museum is that we actually not only get to experience it repeatedly in different ways as we're doing our work here, but I've touched it, and I've sort of tested the tension on some of the strings, and it is so interesting. It's supple and responsive, but it's still so in a way incredibly strong, right?
Yeah, it has to be tight enough to stay,
Here in
right?
the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And isn't
The
that
other
really?
image that, sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, you go. No.
I was going to say the other image that popped into my mind, which might be sort of an interesting way for folks who might struggle to sort of conceptually find themselves in the place that, from which you're working,
Mhm.
is that, when we were, certainly I did this as a kid, the good old fashioned, string between two cans or two
Yes.
cups to your ear. It really is just as simple as that, right? In some ways, like that, what happens when you connect people with a thread and you actually make that thread physical.
Mhm.
And you can talk into it, and the vibration of that tone will carry along and send a message to the person at the other end. I didn't think of that until I was listening to you speak just now. And I think that's a really kind of accessible, interesting way to maybe ease people into the experience of the work.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I agree. And when you were saying about the fact that it's supple but it's still strong, it's almost like the connections within a family or within an extended family or whatever it is. But the more of those layers of string are together, the stronger that is, right? So we're not strong when we're by ourselves, but we are strong when we're together. So it's yeah, and so there still has to be tension, though. I mean, there still has to be some give and take between those 2 points. So, and I like that part of it too. And I like, when I'm creating, I try to think about that kind of thing when I'm creating, that I want dense places, which is, the your small intimate groups, and then it does spread out, right, into a global collectiveness.
And I really appreciate too your sort of turn of phrase around the word tension, because the tension is a structural element in the work.
Absolutely.
But it's also very palpable in terms of its conceptual meaning, right? And the fact that all of what is sort of, what drove you in the beginning to start building this series, what drives you as you're working with it, what drives you to go back into it and say, I need to revisit that, redo that, rebuild that. It's very kin to, I would suggest, the experiences that we're all having in our families, in our communities, in the spaces in which we live, work, and create.
Absolutely.
That those tensions are always there, and particularly strained because of the current era that we're in with the pandemic, with our what I hope is a collective commitment to reconciliation and decolonization. Those are journeys that don't really have an end. I mean, I hope we have I hope we end the pandemic. And I do think we hope, I do hope we get to a place where in our lifetimes, we are looking at this particular moment in the rear view and understanding it in the ways in which we will at that time. But those tensions are really valuable and important because they also mark difference. And I think we need to celebrate that as well. It's part of our knowledge and our learning. With this particular installation and the one here at Guelph Museums, of course, I mentioned that it fills what we call here in the museum the glass box. That's like the main entrance into the museum proper. It's a 3-story glass enclosure for those who haven't yet visited the Guelph Civic Museum. And the museum itself is located on a hilltop that overlooks the downtown of Guelph, in a building that for most of its history, before it became a museum, was a convent that housed the Sisters of Loretto. And the museum, of course, is adjacent to the basilica that sits on the top of the hill in this town and is next to St. Agnes School. That school was opened in 1877, but has for a long time now been boarded and sitting empty. So all of these sort of factors in terms of the geography of the space that you're confronted with as a visitor to the museum, and certainly you, Tracey-Mae, as an artist who is thinking about, who is thinking frankly about the site specificity of this location. I'm interested to hear, what was sort of compelling you about this space? If you could share with us sort of how, your first impressions of the site, how you worked with the site as you were building your installation.
Yeah, sure. So when you and I first touched base, and you'd read my proposal and talked about it, and so then you explained the site specifically, then I was able to go on Google Maps and a couple of other sites to look at what it was, and I was sort of gobsmacked by my thoughts that it was such a lofty sort of space. It is built on the highest point. We build forts there for a specific reason, don't we? We want to be seen, but it's the most protected, and it certainly is elicits a demeanor of power when you're looking up at something, right? It's intimidating. It's certainly not welcoming. So I think that was really exciting to me to be able to do that. And considering the Catholic Church relationship or lack of relationship with Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit communities, like, we're better placed to create than on a space that was habitually owned and is still owned by the Catholic Church. So that was incredibly important to me because I don't get it's not like the Catholic Church is going to, call me up and allow me to make an installation there, are they? So it's just not going to happen. Come on.
Love that idea.
It is an excellent idea, but I just, because it's a bone of contention, right? It's not, and listen, we've seen, you can go online right now and listen to the guy, one of the clergy from Brampton, make a long-winded, nonsensical rant about the fact that residential schools have very, huge lists of positive attributes. Bullshit. You can't mandate that children are ripped from their family. That's it. That's the stop point. You SOB, that's the stop point. Nothing else after that is relevant. Right there, you did something horrific. You ripped them out of their families. That's it. Whatever happened afterwards is horrific. But let's just start with that. So don't tell me that that there was positives to it because you were, beating the Indian out of the Indian. So anything that I can see a Catholic Church in the background, I think you were the second and there's 3 now. That makes me happy. Because we have to keep that conversation going. So your space, sadly enough, the nuns have a particular relationship with the students, and that relationship does not have positive connotations. So that's another great reason for creating there. The fact that you can see it inside and outside, from the inside, from the outside. So your view is is from the other person as well as yourself, right? So you're seeing both sides of that. And I thought that was great too. Because I hadn't been able to, or been invited to create in something so large that was glass. And when that's remarkable. And the way that it looks, I never really thought about it, but when I was there that evening for the opening, or for that Friday evening, and I just saw it in the dark and photographed the one that faces the church in the dark. It was fabulous. I loved it. I loved that sort of, I was looking back at myself in this sort of mirrored imagery through my own lens. And that messed with my mind for a couple of days, because it was like, as I was taking the photograph, I saw myself. And so I kept that photograph because I want to use that one in the book, because it was like, shit, I'm seeing me, the creator of this. And it was just, I don't know how to explain it to you, but it was really fabulous. I love that feeling, that like that I got the import of it, of my own work, and not from an egotistical point of view, not that. It's in my own development, in my own brain, in my own heart. I was seeing my own work, and it was like, oh, okay, oh, that sounds so stupid. But it was really important to me. And I of course, that had never happened before. So it was a touching moment, just, between me and myself and I.
So thank you so much for sharing that. That's, what's interesting is that as I've moved through the building, as I've been describing, and now after this conversation, next time I walk through the space, I'm going to be carrying all of what we're talking about now into the work. So I'm really looking forward to that. But one of the things that I keep doing is stopping and just taking out my phone, trying to photograph the
Yeah.
piece, and just because it reveals itself over time. So I think, I really encourage people who come to the museum to see your piece that they come more than once. I should say too that there's no fee, there are no back barriers to access to this piece. We welcome every single person who wants to spend time with the work, to just be in the space on their own terms, to engage it in the way that they will. And that is frankly how I know I'm doing it, and I would imagine most of the team and visitors who are in the museum day to day are doing the same thing. And one of the things that really strikes me about the installation that you have done on the window through which you see both the Basilica and St. Agnes buildings is that, as you move around the space, you start to perceive sort of the lines of the yarn intersecting in really intentional ways with the view that you see through the window.
Exactly. Yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit, how you were thinking about sort of really architecturally, I think, about how you were
that piece specifically came out of the fact that you and I were talking about when I first got there. You explained that those stained glass windows in the front of the nunnery are, or I'm sorry, what is it again?
Convent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Were original, and so I looked at them for a few minutes while I was sort of getting myself together to start working, and then I look over and I see this big church. And the first thing I thought of when I saw the church was, how many people went hungry to give money to build that? Like that, like every time I'm in one of those, I know that's a basilica, but any kind of church that's really ornate, that's all I can think of is what an utter waste of coin. What, like, and people give money to this organization, and I don't understand what you're getting for your money. You know what I mean? If it's a commodity-based system, exactly what are you paying for? So religion bemuses me anyways, but that specifically. So when I was looking through that window at the basilica, and then I just happened to look up at the stained glass, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to create a stained glass window essentially, and break up this window so that we're looking at that church through an Indigenous lens. And I also lined up a couple of the round windows that are on the church with spatially, if you stand in certain places, it actually lines up with some of the windows on the church. And I wanted that too, because it was like mirroring that window, but I was looking in right through my lens, which, you know, is different than another person's lens. And it's certainly different from that church, whoever's in that church looking back at me, because they're going to have an entirely different subjective view of their space, right? And I have the same thing of the space I was in. Luckily, I think I'm more open to, you know, discussing interpretations than the people on the other end, but it doesn't matter. So yeah, I wanted to be really specific about that, about breaking up those. And frankly, I didn't really think about the school, because I think you'd mentioned it was an all girls school, or was
Uh,
it?
so there, are you talking about St. Agnes in particular?
Yeah, the one that's on the right side if you're looking out the window.
Yes, yeah.
It was an all girls. So I just didn't. It didn't feel like it was as relevant to me as the basilica itself. So I just sort of left that and focused on the one side. Yeah, and I mean, I certainly perhaps should have given the school more thought, but I was really focused on this giant, massive, intimidating space. So and hence the red stained glass window.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting too because it performs such an intervention on that view. I
Oh
think
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
people who visit the museum regularly and look sort of through the window onto that viewpoint. I mean, it is a really special perspective on the city. It's one that is pretty unique to this site, and I think. When we look out the other set of windows, there are multiple other clearly visible church spires. So,
Yes, yes,
like
yes.
most colonial cities, emerged around structured religions that, and there are big, some smaller, but all
Like
impressively large
displays. Yeah.
institutions. Yeah, and that is really how our sight line moves around the city from spire to spire. And it is interesting because what your installation has done is to assert this sort of intervention on that space, and but still, because of its material reality, it still feels humble and it still feels soft, even though it's there and you can't, while it's installed, you can't not see it.
Right, exactly. Right.
It's persistent and it asserts itself in a really interesting way. We're going to, we're pre-recording this conversation for our broadcast later in the month, and we'll be able to weave in some of the footage that we recorded while you were building the installation. I think that will really help listeners and viewers of this conversation to really sort of see in a sort of stop motion capture kind of a way
Yes,
how
yes.
how the installation comes together. And of course, additionally, we'll be sharing some photographs of the finished installation. So we'll weave that all into this conversation so that visitors get a real sense of what we're talking about as we're talking about it. Um,
Splendid.
yeah, when I first learned about your project, I really sort of perceived that it struck a chord at a moment in time when communities across the country are both coming together and frankly breaking apart under the burden of the pandemic and in the face of the history and ongoing lived experiences of the residential school system. Frankly, the way that I characterize it is that these are very tender times.
Mm-hmm.
It really called forth for me a moment in 2015, just after the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had come out and the calls to action were circulated and released. I remember listening to a conversation between Senator Murray Sinclair and CBC journalist Sheila Rogers. I actually went to one of our local health centers. They were live broadcasting the footage, and people across the country were calling in with questions. And it felt like, as it was, a really important and synergizing moment, not only in our collective experience, but in our individual sort of understanding of what does this mean? Where do we go from here? And for the most part, the conversation was, very much about, frankly, if I could use your terminology, hope and healing. It was taking a frank look at true lived experiences, both past and present, and projecting somewhat into sort of a future, talking about sort of Indigenous futurity. What is the next step? Where do we go from here? How do we continue to heal and to build as communities? And the very last question that was posed that day said, you know, and I'm going to paraphrase this next part because it does sit in my mind as a sort of persistent thought piece, but I don't want to misquote Senator St. Clair because that would be a really wrong thing to do. But nonetheless, the question came in, and basically it was, okay, so now we know we can't unknow what we know. Will it get better? Will we find our way to a better place? And I wanted to be really, upfront in this conversation. And in my reflection at the time, I thought I was completely surprised by the answer, because he said, no,
Yeah.
you know, it won't immediately get better.
No. Yeah.
That there will be anger. There will be a lot of anger. It will be difficult, and it will be really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, you know, that really hurt my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it still does. And it's, you know, it's something that really stayed with me and I think will always stay with me. And of course, he spoke much more eloquently than I'm describing in the conversation. But I wanted to share that today in the context of this conversation, and wanted to ask you if you would feel comfortable sharing, what does reconciliation mean for you?
You know, I get asked questions like that a lot, and I actually get asked the same sort of question that Senator Sinclair was posed with, which like, will it get better? Are you hopeful? And I think my answer to the CBC that was right in your space was no. No, I'm not hopeful. I can't be hopeful after looking at things like the Facebook post that I can no longer read, right? Like, so how do you move forward from that? I mean, I've had lots of positive engagement. So I think I'm hopeful at that moment. And then, you know, something else happens and it sort of wears you down a little bit, right? Even stones turn to dust, right? So it's yeah, I think I just get worn, you know, and certainly he was privy to so many things that you and I are not, right? So can you imagine what he wears every day? No. So, and neither can I. So, and I've just got a tiny burden to carry and can't be hopeful. So I can't even imagine in what headspace he is in. Especially when we look at our prime minister, who went away on the very first Truth and Reconciliation Day on September 30th. What in God's name were you thinking? What optics did you think might come out of that? Right? That's, oh my gosh, you're an idiot. Just, I'm so disappointed in him. I can't even explain it. So when you ask a question, you know, what do you think about reconciliation, or what is reconciliation? Well, it's not that. God. So again, why should it be hopeful when our very own prime minister, who's supposedly, you know, on this side of Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples, goes away on vacation and does not answer the call? Come on, like don't expect people not to be angry about that or disappointed about that. So it is hard to think that the general population within Canada, a settler nation, gives a crap because our own prime minister fluffed off the day. Give me a break. Come on. Like, I just, it's hard to look at that without some cynicism, and I'm a massive cynic. It's terrible, but I know that I am. So now my thoughts about reconciliation have stepped back about 20 steps, because I think, well, he led by example. That's not a great example. So it's one day a year, and I feel like maybe that's all that it's going to be. So, I mean, I will pursue creating these creations even more so now, if I have to work 7 days a week, just because at least I'm connecting with 20 people when I'm creating that I can talk to this about, and we can say, what does it mean to you, right? Reconciliation isn't my responsibility, right? It isn't any other First Nations person's responsibility. The responsibility of decolonization falls upon the colonizer. It is not our responsibility. So, and that sounds nasty and whatever, but it's not. I'm not being nasty. I'm being honest and logical. I need to decolonize as well, and that's my responsibility. But that's within my own headspace. The institutions around colonization have to be deconstructed in order for there to be any reconciliation. That's the end of the sentence. There is no more than that, right? It narrows down to one sentence, right? And you know, I don't even know what that looks like anymore. I mean, I do, but you know, and I know you're going to ask me that, but it's like, yeah, I don't know anymore. I want to be positive. That's the thing. You know what I'm like. I want to be, I'm cheerful, and but yeah, sometimes the smiling face is the one that hides the most pain, because I have to listen to this shit all the time, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, and I listen to people standing right in front of me when I'm creating, saying things that are just ridiculous. You know, I just can't. Anyway, sorry, off on a tangent. You can edit all that out. I'm just, it's the way I feel about it. It's a really hard question, especially after what's happened with the prime minister. I just feel like if it didn't make any important, you know, effect on him, why would it anybody else?
Yeah.
It's just another day.
I'm so grateful for your honesty, Tracey-Mae, and that is something that that I recognized in how you operate. You are a straight shooter, my friend, and I really appreciate and value that. It is it's a difficult question to ask. It's a more difficult question to answer, and I think, you know, one of the reasons why I'm drawn to posing it is so that in the conversations that we hope will happen around the dialogue we're having today, and with the piece in particular, and frankly, in our day-to-day interactions in the worlds in which we move, um, to think seriously about reconciliation and also decolonization and the relationship they have to each other, and how we need to embody that in our day-to-day lives, is really beyond description. And yet we see the language of reconciliation and decolonization out there in the world around us. We are certainly, as a museum, have a major role to play in not only helping people to put meaning to those words, but also inviting them to undertake the practice of what that means, like uniquely and individually and on their own journey. Um, you know, my team here in the museum often hears me say, it's more important in this journey to ask more questions than you answer, because that prioritizes the process and the learning, as opposed to, you know, the end. And I think possibly, if I'm reflecting back on that conversation I recounted, you know, in which Senator Sinclair said, you know, it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse before it gets better. It's because the journey is the journey, and we're, you know, people will move at the pace that they move, and some will come to that place much later than others. And the tensions between those moments and those spaces are, you know, there's opportunity, but there's also pain and discomfort and sadness and, you know, and all the things that we feel and will feel but can't describe or name.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I just I so value your frank and unfettered response to that question, because I think that's where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how sad is that, right? I mean, yeah, it's a sad commentary on a population that thinks it's so forward thinking and such a first world nation as far as the way we treat others, and that's not true, right?
Yeah. I I'd love to move to sort of future forward, that future being as soon as tomorrow. No time like the present, right?
Yeah.
You know, we're recording this on October 8th. Tomorrow, October 9th, you'll be bringing hope and healing to Parliament Hill.
Yeah.
And you shared with me when we had some, private words as you were here in the building, building your installation, some of what you were thinking about in anticipation of that installation. I wondered if you could share with us, what your vision is
Absolutely.
for the installation now that it's on the cusp, it's happening soon.
Yes. So what I ended up doing was I'm creating a very large braid. So because once I got the pictures of where I'm installing, I sort of changed my I was going to use small braids, and I thought, screw that. So it's a large braid and very long. And so that will actually be cascading. And my plan is I'll actually work on it while I'm sitting there for the day. So lots of it'll be sewn here, but when I get to Parliament Hill, I'll lay it out and then I'll sit at it and knit it through the day and film that. So I will send you that so that you can use this within the video. And yeah, so I've made a smaller, well, I mean, it's still 6 feet, but smaller orange braid. And then the other one, I mean, I'm not sure how many feet I'm at yet, but a larger red braid beside it. I won't be working on the orange braid because that chapter is closed but open, right? So the children from the residential schools, I can't ever change that. I can't ever take that back. I can't ever bring them back. So it needed to be finite. That braid needed to be finite. In my own tiny brain, it needed to be finite. Whereas the red braid is the continuation of this culture, right? And the sewing back together of that culture into this braid was important to me. So I'll just sit it at the top of the stairs and I'll let it go down. Although when I'm in the space, I'm not really sure whether I'll be at the bottom of the stairs or the top of the stairs. So the most important part of a totem pole is the bottom, right? So should I sit at I haven't decided yet, but so I'll send you photographs from it, and yeah, and you can decide what you think, but I haven't decided where I will sit. But yeah, and the point of it is to me it's almost a protest piece. I'm not, yes, I have permission to be there, but it's like intervention, that's what you said. It's almost like an intervention right sitting there. So I'm sort of like I'm cordoned off, right? But I am in the way. And I kind of like that. So it's kind of like this is good. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that, especially after last Friday's faux pas on the part of the Prime Minister. I'm really looking forward to it. So I've talked to some press there, so hopefully that'll be something that gets shared. And I can publicly call him out on this. And yeah, I mean, when I watched his apology, it's as empty as watching the bishops apologize. It's words don't mean shit, right? They are literally words. They are empty without action. So yeah, his action is pretty loud and clear to me. I heard it. Did you? You heard it. I heard
Yes.
it. So this is an action on my part, and you will also hear it. So that's my, what's funny, when I was talking to you about it, I was really excited and heart because like this is going to be good. It's a positive thing. Now I'm pissed, and it's like it changed. Like, I mean, I ripped apart stuff to start over yesterday because I was like, okay, because I had other installations before that. So I worked till midnight last night, and I got up at 5:30 this morning, work until and then I will. Oh, and I had an artist talk last night at Hamilton Art Gallery. So it's just like this. I don't care. I do not give a shit. I will work all night tonight. No, I can't because I got to drive there tonight at 4 o'clock. I got to drive there 5 hours. Anyway, so I don't care because if I have to take everything with me and sew while I'm driving, I'm so disappointed and hurt that it's, like I said, it's morphed into something different. Just like this project did, right? Went from something positive to something more confrontational. And I'm not really confrontational unless it's important. I'm really not. I'd rather just walk away. Like, what the hell? Like from the guy who said it's not art. Yeah, you and I don't really have anything to talk about, right? So like, why be confrontational about that? But this is something worth being confrontational about. And hopefully tomorrow that will you know, that will show up in the work.
Yeah.
Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, having been witness to some of your process, just in a small way, in terms of what you did here in Guelph, uh, I can only imagine and I hope that there are people who are witness. I hope that
Yes.
the
Yes.
folks that move through that space as you're building your installation
Mhm.
will take that time to pause and just, be witness and to ask those questions.
Exactly.
Because that is both a tremendous gift and also a challenge.
Hmm.
And I
Absolutely.
think that's what we wear as individuals moving in the world in the way that we do. Um, we have to make decisions about when we act, why we act, how we act.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
think that accountability is there in the work.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad. I mean, that's a positive. That's good, right? Yeah, that's the whole point. And I think sometimes I think about what is the point of art if there's not a point? Otherwise, like I said, I paint bunnies and rabbits and butterflies and shit. What? Yeah, and that's lovely. If that's what you want to do, have at. But it's just not even. And even my sculptural work is I try to make it look like plastic because I'm it's a commentary on the plasticity of our whole life, everything around us, right? You know this throwaway whatever. So it's still political because like I don't know. I guess I wasn't put here to make pretty things. I'm here to say something and to try to elicit some sort of change in a positive way.
I do um, I do think that certainly what you've done in the installations, those that I've seen from afar, and those the installation that's here in Guelph, there is an exquisite beauty to the work. And I know you just said that you're not here to make beautiful things, but I think the beauty in it is that it reaches so simply and so directly into or to us as sort of human animals, if I could use that
Well, I'm
phrase.
just saying it's not simple, my friend.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess it's that we know what that material is.
Yes.
And we have relationship to it already, even if we don't always understand how it's being used in
Yes.
the
Yes. Yeah.
we're engaged in, right? So I think it's possible because you're proving it is to make something that's both beautiful and challenging, to make something that is full of tension and anger and heaviness feel light and purposeful and directional, you know? Um, and I think, I don't know what magic you carry into your work, but it really for me lives on all of those levels. And
I appreciate
from
it.
this conversation, oh, I'm so excited about getting, revisiting the piece as well, and really hope that this conversation will also inspire folks right across the province, frankly, to go to the sites where your work is still currently installed. And I know you have a full list of not only the locations, but the dates of all of those installations and where people can see your work. I would love to sort of conclude our conversation today, sort of on a message of hope and action, if I can. Not by sweeping all of what you've just shared under the rug, but by saying that, we have work to do and we have to take steps, and what could those steps look like? So I'm wondering if we can sort of cast our vision ahead a little bit and think about what the quote unquote story of 2021 will be. Sort of if we look back on this moment, these moments in 5 or 10 years time,
Yes. Yeah.
what what will the story be?
I think it'll be that the world, and it's certainly not specific just Canadians or North Americans or yeah, um, needed to learn how to adapt. Where we've sort of been in this status for such a long time, and this blip um, it forced people to adapt and to recognize that change has to happen. I think maybe it'll be like in the 1960s where there was that all of a sudden a massive push for women's rights, Black rights, Indigenous, all these things happened at one time, cumulatively. And that's what we identify with that time. And I hope that's what we identify with here. Yeah, there was a pandemic, but it forced these issues. It forced us to recognize these things because we were actually paying attention more acutely to what was going on around us. So I think that's what's going to be what we look and see. Yes, the pandemic is the biggest story. However, here is the trickle down, right? So yeah, to me, I think that's what it's going to be. I sure hope it's going to be that, right? I don't want our blip in history to be just the pandemic. I don't want that to be, you know, what our generation is remembered for, or, you know, how it's written in the history books. You know, Trump, COVID, you know, 2 pandemics, two horrible scourges. So it's like, yeah, what do you want to remember? I want to remember all those great things that came out of that pandemic.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
conversation,
And the fact that we can even think that there are great things emerging in the moment of now.
yeah.
It's a really important question, not only for us as individuals, but, you know, selfishly, I'll say as a curator in a civic history museum, that question for me is weighing very, very heavily because, you know, we have an opportunity, as all museums do, that collect stories from their community in collaboration with their community, in conversation with their communities. How do we collect and hold and carry and support and share those stories, not only today, but in 5 years' time or 10 years' time and 100 years' time? So that question for me, I so appreciate your forthright answer, because that in part sort of sets the framework. What do we need to pay attention to? How do we pay attention to? How do we how do we hold and support and carry those stories for our future selves?
Yes,
Because
exactly.
there will be an end time where we're not in the midst of a pandemic. I believe that. I think we'll find
Yes.
ourselves
Yeah.
there, but I can't look in a crystal ball and sort of predict when that's going to happen. But
No,
for
exactly.
now,
So all you can do is deal with this moment and make it the best
yeah.
that you can, right? Yeah, and the most positive that you can. Yeah, exactly.
Tracey-Mae, what an absolute pleasure to chat with you today, especially when you've got so much going on.
Ah. Ah.
I am grateful. We are grateful to have had this time with you. You know, as I mentioned earlier, we're sort of pre-recording this conversation because you have an incredibly intense schedule, and because we want to make sure that we are sharing lots of imagery about your work in order to sort of really
Absolutely.
create that pathway to hope and healing,
Thank you.
as you're hoping to do, and as you do, as you move from community to community. So
Thank you
thank
so
you so
much.
very much.
Thank you.
I'll say too that for our viewers and our listeners out there, Tracey-Mae's installation Hope and Healing Canada is at the Guelph Civic Museum right now. The outdoor installation continues until October 24th. It's sort of timed to begin and end with the Culture Days season. Also, the indoor installation Up Now continues right through the end of February of 2022. And so there's lots of time for an initial visit and then repeat visits to the installation, because the relationship does change over time. So really hope folks take us up on that opportunity. Also, please, please, please follow Tracey-Mae Chambers and hashtag Hope and Healing Canada. You can find all kinds of information about the project on Facebook and Twitter, and a little bit on Instagram. I saw some institutions sharing on Instagram. Check out Guelph Museum's website and the socials that we support and carry for programs, announcements, and ways to learn how you can get involved. I hope that you join us again on Wednesday, November 17th at noon for our next edition of History Bites. That program will focus on the 100th anniversary of the poppy as a symbol of remembrance, because we will be squarely in remembrance season at that time. So between now and then, I hope you stay well, stay safe. Thank you.